My coworker wasn't who he said he was, and I found out the hard way. When I first started my job at the firm, I thought I'd finally found stability. After years of bouncing between internships and short-term contracts, I landed a full-time position as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing company downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, came with benefits, and, at least on the surface, looked like a decent environment. My department was small, about 15 people, and everyone was fairly normal. Or so I thought. Then there was Ethan. Ethan joined about a month after I did. He was effortlessly charming in that practice kind of way, the kind of guy who made everyone feel like they were his favorite person. He cracked jokes during meetings, brought coffee for the interns, and somehow managed to stay on the boss's good side while pushing everyone else's boundaries just enough to be entertaining. I wasn't immune to his charisma either. During my first few weeks, he made a point of sitting next to me in the break room, asking about my hobbies, where I lived, what shows I watched. He remembered tiny details like how I took my coffee or that I liked mint gum. I figured he was just friendly, maybe trying to make the new girl feel comfortable. We clicked fast. I just moved to the city and he seemed like the first real friend I'd made there. We started grabbing lunch together, talking about our coworkers, complaining about deadlines, trading memes over Slack during meetings. He'd confide about how he hated living with his roommates, how he wanted to start his own marketing agency someday, how his ex still occasionally texted him but he was totally over her. He seemed honest, maybe even vulnerable at times. Over the next few months he started helping me with projects. We'd stay late together and he'd offer to proof my presentations or tweak my designs to make them pop. Management loved the results, so I assumed his advice was solid. He started getting noticed by our manager, and soon he was being handed more client-facing responsibilities. I was happy for him, until I noticed something strange. One day my manager called me in for a quick check-in. She mentioned being impressed by my pitch deck for a big client named Wilcox Solutions. I froze because I hadn't worked on Wilcox at all. That was Ethan's project. When I said so, she frowned and said she must have mixed it up because Ethan had told her I had helped with the data visualization part. But I hadn't. When I later asked Ethan about it, he laughed it off. Something about the manager always getting confused and it not being a big deal. It seemed innocent enough at first, so I dropped it. But similar little confusions started happening. A client emailed me thanking me for a logo concept I'd never seen. Another coworker mentioned Ethan talking about how he'd been mentoring me on graphic design, even though I'd been doing that kind of work for years. The more I paid attention, the more I realized Ethan was quietly taking credit for my ideas while sprinkling my name into conversations just enough to look generous. The first time I truly saw how calculated it was happened during a meeting with the regional director. We were reviewing campaign results and Ethan presented the report I'd spent 2 weekends perfecting. He barely changed anything, maybe a color here or a word there, but he didn't once mention me. The director complimented the analytics breakdown, saying whoever did it clearly understood market segmentation. Ethan nodded and smiled, accepting the praise like it was his. I sat there frozen, my stomach twisting as everyone clapped. I told myself I'd confront him afterward, but I didn't. I chickened out. That night I went home angry at myself more than him. I replayed the meeting over and over. I'd stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause drama. The next day Ethan walked over to my desk, grinning like nothing had happened. He dropped off a coffee, told me I was crushing it, and winked. It was almost taunting. From that moment I started keeping notes. Every message, every draft, every file version with timestamps. If he was going to use my work, I wanted proof. I began sending updates through official channels instead of Slack. Slowly I started pulling back from him, keeping our interactions professional. He noticed. One afternoon he casually asked if everything was okay, said I seemed distant. I smiled and told him I was just busy. Inside I was already planning. A few weeks later our manager announced a huge pitch competition inside the company. The winning concept would be implemented for a national client and come with a cash bonus and promotion consideration. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been waiting for. I spent days crafting my presentation, pouring every ounce of creativity into it. Ethan entered too. He kept joking about how we'd probably tie, but his tone had that edge, the kind that sounded like he'd already decided he'd win. The night before the presentations I stayed late to finalize my slides. Ethan came by my desk before leaving and offered to take a quick look at my progress. I told him I was almost done and didn't need help. He shrugged and said he just wanted to make sure I didn't overcomplicate it. When he walked away, something in me didn't trust him. So I saved my final version to a private drive instead of the shared one. Just in case. The next morning I came in early and opened the shared folder. Sure enough, there was a file named almost identical to mine. Same title, same format, but with Ethan's name attached. I opened it. It was my deck. Word for word, slide for slide, except he'd replaced my name with his and tweaked the color palette slightly. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. For a full 10 minutes I just stared at the screen, disbelief turning into a cold, sharp rage. Then I remembered my private copy, the one time-stamped before his. I realized he must have accessed an earlier draft from the shared folder and stolen it. The presentation started at 10 a.m. Ethan went first. I watched him stand in front of the executives, confidently delivering my work. I caught the familiar phrasing, the jokes I'd inserted, the client analysis that had taken me nights to perfect. People were nodding, impressed. I felt sick. Then it was my turn. I walked up to the front, plugged in my drive and started speaking. I didn't mention Ethan, didn't accuse anyone. I just presented my version. The real, polished one with the additional research and visuals I'd finalized the night before. Halfway through I could feel the room shift. The executives were leaning forward, whispering. They could tell my deck was the original. Richer, better structured, more complete. By the end the room broke into applause. When the regional director asked if anyone had helped me, I smiled and said I'd been inspired by the collaborative spirit in the office but that all the content and visuals were my own. I saw Ethan's face tighten. The director congratulated me on the clarity of the concept, saying it was miles ahead of the others. Ethan sat in silence, fiddling with his pen. I won the competition. The next day my manager called me in to discuss project leadership for the client rollout. Ethan was conspicuously absent from the meeting. Later that week, HR requested a follow-up about ownership discrepancies, after receiving an anonymous complaint. I didn't have to guess who filed it. When HR asked for documentation, I calmly provided file timestamps, Slack logs, and saved drafts that showed my progression from concept to final. They thanked me for the evidence and told me not to discuss it further. A week later Ethan's desk was cleared out. No announcement, no goodbye email. Just gone. For a while things were quiet. I focused on work, earned my promotion and learned to trust my instincts again. Then about a month later I received a message request on LinkedIn, from Ethan. The first line read, "You really didn't have to go that far." I deleted it without replying. But the story didn't end there. 2 months later, a recruiter from another agency reached out to me for a potential position. During the interview one of the managers casually mentioned knowing an Ethan, who used to work at my firm. She said he'd left abruptly after some project confusion. I smiled politely, pretending not to know the details. After the interview curiosity got the better of me. I looked up Ethan's profile again. His job title had changed twice in a few weeks. Then about a month later the profile disappeared entirely. I figured that was the end of it until last summer. I was walking into a coffee shop near my apartment when I saw someone sitting by the window. It took me a second to recognize him, but it was Ethan. His hair was shorter and he looked thinner, older somehow. He spotted me and froze. For a moment neither of us moved. Then he looked away, grabbed his bag and left without saying a word. I stood there, coffee in hand, watching him disappear down the street. A strange mix of pity and satisfaction hit me. I hadn't wanted revenge, not really. I just wanted the truth to come out. And it had. That night I found myself thinking about how easy it is to trust people who mirror what you want to see. Kindness, ambition, friendship. Ethan had been a mirror, reflecting my eagerness to belong. I'd mistaken his interest for genuine connection when it was just manipulation. Months later when HR did an internal audit I found out just how deep his deceit went. Turns out Ethan had falsified parts of his resume. The degree he'd listed was from a university that had no record of him. He'd even used a friend as a fake reference. It wasn't just me he'd deceived, it was everyone. It was unsettling realizing I'd spent so much time confiding in someone who'd built his entire identity on lies. There were moments late at night when I wondered if I'd missed obvious red flags. The way he always redirected questions about his past, the inconsistencies in his stories, the subtle manipulations whenever I mentioned other friends. Looking back it was all there, I just didn't want to see it. I think that's what hurt the most. Not the stolen work, not the betrayal, but the realization that I'd ignored my own instincts. The little voice that whispered something felt off. I silenced it because I wanted to believe the best in people. Now I document everything. Every project, every message. I'm still friendly at work, but there's a boundary now. A quiet line I don't let anyone cross too easily. People joke that I'm paranoid, but I call it self-preservation. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what would have happened if I hadn't saved that private copy. If I hadn't trusted my gut that one night. Maybe I'd be the one quietly escorted out of the office while Ethan kept climbing the ladder built from other people's work. There's a part of me that still remembers the early days, when we were just two coworkers laughing over bad coffee and office gossip. This weird morning of friendship that never really existed. Because that's what it feels like. Morning. Every now and then when I pass that same coffee shop, I half expect to see him sitting there again. But I never do. Maybe he moved away. Maybe he found another job where he can start over, spin new stories, charm a new set of coworkers. Or maybe he finally ran out of mirrors. As for me, I learned something I'll never forget. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people who seem to understand us the most. Trust is fragile, and once it breaks, it doesn't just change how you see them. It changes how you see yourself. Still, I don't regret how it ended. Because when the truth finally came out, it wasn't dramatic or loud or messy. It was quiet. Just a clean, inevitable unraveling of lies.